Welcome to episode 7, Chronicles of UK Salafism, an Insider Perspective. In this particular episode, I will focus on the events that transpired during 1996. And I think it's pertinent to start with an overview of some emerging personalities from this point, due to them arguably being amongst the causes of division and rupturing of the Salafi movement during the mid 90s up until now. And I will begin with none other than Abdul Alam Abu Khadija, one of the founders of the Salafi publications cult, and whom I also entitle the Abu Khadijite cult. Contrary to his claims that he embraced Salafism in 1988, there is sufficient evidence that he was in actuality a non-practicing Muslim attending the University of Bradford in 1991. During the years 92 to 93, his own brother approached Abu Muntazir, the head of JIMAS, and elicited help to persuade Abdul Wahid away from his jihadi leanings. This influence was being reinforced somehow by his involvement in humanitarian work during the Bosnian conflict, and his first marriage was to a sister from that region. That does not mean that those involved in the Bosnian conflict, as I've previously highlighted in episodes, were jihadi or takfiri inclined. However, there was a clear intimation from Abu Khadija's own brother that he had these jihadi leanings, thereby indicating an element of extremism. JIMAS members successfully counselled Abu Khadija, who by this time was attending the University of Manchester, and he subsequently embraced Salafism later on during those years, abandoning the jihadi tendencies his brother was concerned about. Referring to another personality that has been integral to the rise and contributory to the divisions that have emerged amongst the wider Salafi movement is Amjad Rafiq, also known as Abu Iyad. He enrolled at the University of Essex, and JIMAS members welcomed him and introduced him to the Islamic Society there. He was a keen participant and also began to teach himself Arabic. Moving forward to the middle of the 90s now, with the continuing split and splintering of JIMAS that I have also mentioned in previous episodes. By this time, a contingent decided to visit Abu Muntazir at his home in Ipswich, and this included Abu Khadija and Amjad Rafiq. They tried to persuade Abu Muntazir to distance himself from his increasingly politicized position regarding the organization and encourage a reconnection with some of the scholars and their students. Apparently, Abu Muntazir did not take this advice very well and rejected what they had offered to him. So at this stage, we will return to 1996. And I want to cover some of the lectures I delivered during that year, that they were few in number due to my increased involvement in Brixton and the associated activities around that. So I will refer to the first talk, which was on the 1st of May, entitled Brotherhood. This was delivered in Bradford. And my lecture focused on a particular series of books, 2 volumes, entitled Medinian Society at the Time of the Prophet. And I'll read an excerpt from that. The excerpt says, quote, "Undoubtedly, the ties which bring people together are of different types, i.e. tribes, nations, etc. Islam made the bond of faith the most important basis for binding people together in harmony, although it permitted and even encouraged other bonds." Close quote. My notes show that I concluded this particular lecture highlighting the 7 rights of brotherhood. The second lecture I delivered during that year was on the 11th of August, and this was entitled The Day of Judgment and took place in East London. On the 30th of October, I delivered a lecture entitled Muslim by Name, Naughty by Nature at the Queen Mary and Westerfield University, London. This lecture focused on the challenges of Muslims turning away from their faith in preference for other desirous pursuits and, in some instances, vice. Proceeding from that stage now, I want to highlight local, national, and international events that were taking place during that year. And I will start with the first. The first local event that caused a huge impact on the Brixton community was the death of Surat Abdul Malik, who died on the 12th of March and was subsequently buried in plot J33 of the Garden of Peace in East London. And his death had a huge impact, as I've mentioned, on the Salafi community and indeed wider community that had come to know and love Surat. Many of us were at his bed when he died. Some of us had just popped out actually as well to get some refreshments and was suddenly called when reaching the bottom of the ground floor of the hospital and racing back up. And the shock and the sense of loss was huge, as he was a mentor to many of us and a close friend. Referring to a national event and the climate during that year as well, it was clear that the extremist Takfiri narrative and propaganda was proliferating. And on the 6th of April, we sat with Sheikh Ali Hassan al-Halabi, who was visiting at the time. And I have two cassettes here in which we discussed various issues relating to matters associated with the mosque and the current environment. This session was then followed by a visit to Luton, Court-e-Islam in Luton, where Sheikh Ali Hassan delivered a lecture entitled Holding On to Hot Coals and the Evil of Takfir. We were requested to attend and support our colleagues in Luton, alongside bolstering support for Sheikh Ali Hassan in view of previous conflict with supporters and adherents of Abu Hamza al-Misri. In attending that particular session, I can confirm that the atmosphere was highly charged, and exchanges were quite terse. However, there wasn't any violent confrontation at that particular event, and it passed off not peacefully, but without the concerns that were realized previously, meaning that the confrontations that had taken place before were not to a similar extent on this occasion. Another national event was somewhat of a crisis, I would say, in that in June we met, and by we I mean senior members and the leadership of JIMAS at Good Street, Rabita Islami Muslim World League, where Sheikh Suhaib Hassan presided over a meeting to determine the future of JIMAS and the leadership of Abu Muntazir. And in this particular sitting, we were witnessing the behavior, I would say, of particular contingents that had come down. Abu Khadija and colleagues who were associated with him were very vocal in this particular meeting, and even disrespectful to Sheikh Suhaib. And many of us remember the infamous address in which they refused to adhere to Sheikh Suhaib's directives and advice by stating that he had married his daughter to an Ikhwani. Other incidents that were recorded and witnessed on that occasion involved individuals like Abdul Razak As-Sanani, who was once close to Abu Muntazir but had quickly joined the ranks of the initial of the cult, should I say, with Abu Khadija and his colleagues that were emerging. And what was witnessed is when Abu Muntazir arrived with Idris Palmer, an American colleague of Ali Tamimi, he exclaimed to those who were within earshot, Khalas, it is confirmed. There's proof. And the intimation behind this was that because Abu Muntazir had arrived with Idris Palmer, he had therefore aligned himself with Ali Tamimi and the Sururi al-Muntada Dawa and ideology. It's unsurprising that the meeting and its outcome was unsuccessful. And it was at that stage that JIMAS was abandoned by the vast majority of Salafis affiliated to it at that particular time. Only a few remained with Abu Muntazir. In the immediate aftermath, Sheikh Suhaib saw and discussed with a brother on the way back home on the underground that he wanted to convey 2 points to the contingent from Birmingham, again, who I'd mentioned were the most vocal and vying for power at that particular stage. And these 2 points were as follows. One, not to rely on the Jordanian scholars. I would say and add that when this came out to all of us around the country, it was a surprise, one of which was rejected by the vast majority of us. The second point that Sheikh Suhaib made was that he was the most senior student of knowledge in the UK, who we all had to take as their reference point, as the reference point for scholasticism. He also criticised the Birmingham contingent's reliance on Dawood Burbank, Abu Talha, who has since passed, rahimahullah, who hadn't completed his studies in Medina University. Now, before moving on from that particular address from Sheikh Suhaib and conveyance, he was correct in stating that he was the most senior student of knowledge in the UK. And his statement that he should be referred to by all of us wasn't one of uh, arrogance. We saw from senior scholars on subsequent visits to Saudi Arabia, for example, that Sheikh Suhaib was continually referred to. And I personally witnessed that when I visited Saudi Arabia on Umrah in 2002 and was invited to Sheikh Abdul Muhsin Al Abad's house. And he allowed me to ask particular questions. And when a member of the Salafi publications cult tried to diminish the position of Sheikh Suhaib in a question that he asked, Sheikh Abdul Muhsin immediately rebutted this individual and told him that Sheikh Suhaib was one to be referred to due to his seniority in the UK. Other occasions that we are aware of is when Sheikh Ibn Baz visited Makkah, went to see, should I say, delegations of pilgrims and asked for Sheikh Suhaib on many of those occasions. So Sheikh Suhaib's statement was not one that was out of place. In actuality, it was an accurate statement from him. However, when these points were conveyed to the Birmingham contingent, which included Abu Sufyan at the time, they rejected this and decided, alongside other returnees from Medina University, to establish Oasis, the organization of Associated Sunni Islamic Societies. And this would rival the Muslim Brotherhood influence FOSIS up and down the UK universities. Subsequent to this formation, there was an Oasis conference on the 26th to the 28th of July. And the speakers that are highlighted on the poster, which is still available, and the flyers, were Sheikh Abdullah Al Farsi, who was listed as a student of Ibn Baz. Sheikh Abdullah Al Farsi was from Kuwait. Sheikh Suhaib Hassan, who had agreed, from what we understood, surprisingly so, to attend this particular conference. And he was also listed as a student of Sheikh Ibn Baz. Abu Usama Khalifa Dhahabi, also listed as a student of Sheikh Ibn Baz. Abu Alia Sakil Sharif, Abdurrahim Green, Abu Sufyan Abdul Karim McDowell, Usama Hassan, Muazzam Zaman, and the next column of speakers included myself, Abdul Baker, Dr. Faisal Malik, Abu Khadija, Amjad Rafiq, Ilyas Kermani, and Farid Habitan, and others. The title of this particular conference was Islam Unveiled to its Very Core. The surprising thing again about this step and this power move from Abu Khadija and his associates at the time is that they did not consult all of the individuals and request their attendance or participation in this particular conference. I was one of them. I therefore refused to cooperate and participate in what as I've said, was an attempted power move. I don't know how many others also didn't receive notification or an invitation to this event. But however, this formed a pattern that continues up until now with Salafi publications. The change from Oasis to Salafi publications took place shortly after that conference, in that they list speakers, scholars, stating that they are going to be attending or that they have been invited, only for conference attendees to see that the usual suspects are the ones delivering the conference in the end, none other than Abu Khadija, Abu Hakim Bilal Davis, Dr. Abdullah Lahmami, and a few others. Proceeding now to international events of significance. On the 23rd of August, Osama bin Laden issued his first declaration of war against the Americans occupying the land of the two holy places. This was a paradigmatic shift of the violent extremist strategy that formally targeted the near enemy, that being the Arab and Muslim lands and regimes that they considered despotic and infidels. The new focus was on the far enemy, the US government being the first far enemy that they had decided to target, and their citizens. And this was as a result of the perceived oppression of Muslims across many societies in the Western and Muslim lands. This so-called fatwa was allegedly issued by another Saudi who belonged to bin Laden's Advice and Reformation Committee in London, Khalid al-Fawaz. I would later be part of a firm of solicitors that actually represented Khalid Fawaz. Unsurprisingly, the excitement at this declaration among the extremists in the UK and beyond was palpable. I've referred to Abdullah El Faisal and others previously, and this was being referenced as a cry and a legitimization to increase the extremist rhetoric and call to jihad as they understood it, which included terrorism and criminal activity in Western societies. I will conclude at this stage by referring to my theoretical framework of cognitive development to highlight that I, like many of my colleagues, were still at that second youthful phase of development, that very formative, overzealous and idealistic phase. And this was seen in our activism at that time. The learning process continued, and the classes that I have written notes for and cassettes are as follows. On the 16th of May, my written notes highlight fiqh classes, jurisprudence, focusing on the topic of al-ijma, consensus, with Abu Usama. I have three undated cassettes from Abu Usama on the explanation of Bukhari. And I'm sure and certain that these are from that particular year in view of the subsequent cassettes that I have that are dated. So, for example, on the 21st of May, we continued with the explanation of Bukhari, lesson 4. On the 4th of June, these lessons continued with Abu Usama. And on the 20th of June, we had another fiqh class. These are from my written notes here, and the title was Al-Hukm, the ruling. On the 2nd of July, we continued with the lessons in Bukhari, lesson 8. And a day later, we started yet another class, Usulul Thalatha, again with Abu Usama. 2 days later, on the 5th of July, he held a lecture entitled Hold On to the Rope of Allah. And the final point I'd make regarding learning here refers to a cassette that I have from Dawood Adib, dated the 26th of November, and its title was The Meaning of Kunut in Witter Prayer. Now, I only recall Dawood Adib attending Brixton on one occasion, but not delivering this particular lecture. I've decided to include this particular cassette because it was still part of my process of learning during that particular year. And with that, it's sufficient to conclude some of the events that took place that I have actual evidence and recordings for during 1996.